Welcome to Embrace today. We are grateful that you are here today. If I have not met you yet, my name is Austin, and I'm the pastor here, and we're just thrilled that you come to worship with us today. It's just great to be back together in this place, and so whether you consider Embrace your home, you regularly worship here, want to welcome you, but also if it's your first time or one of your first few times, want to say a special welcome to you. We're grateful that you've come, no matter how long it's been, no matter where you're at, no matter where life has taken you in the past. I want you to know that we are grateful that you're here today. Know that you belong here, that we love that you are in this place, and we're excited about what God does in this space when we gather together. Something powerful takes place, and so just grateful to be able to be together. We are in a message series called Nothing Good, and just honestly looking at this series title, Nothing Good, it's like bump, bump, wah, right? It's like Debbie Downer, right? I mean, it's just like it doesn't feel positive, it doesn't feel upbeat, and like I'm always trying to put a little bit of a positive spin on life, and so it's just like nothing good. But the problem is that not everything is positive, right? Like there are just times and there are things that just aren't good. And so throughout this series, we are looking at these moments in life that we experience things, something happens to us, or we do something, and we feel like in this moment nothing good could ever come from this. And we experience something and we live through something and we have an emotion or a feeling and we feel like nothing good could ever come from this. And we're like, I don't really know how to deal with that. But the good news is, which is kind of a weird statement, the good news to say about the moments when we feel like nothing good could ever come from this is that we worship a God who left heaven and came to earth in the form of a man named Jesus, who was fully God and fully man. And in that moment, Jesus, he experienced those moments like we did, where nothing good could come from it, where he felt the feelings and the emotions and had the experiences that we have had because, again, he is fully God and fully man. And so as he is a man, a human being, he experiences these things and has these moments throughout his life on the planet where he feels like nothing good can come from this. Where we find that Jesus is spending himself, like you will find in Scripture when you see that Jesus, he reclined in a moment, or Jesus, he went away for a moment. He went and he spent time in the desert. He went away to his Father to pray. And in those moments, we see that Jesus is experiencing something in this world, and he is responding to those nothing good moments in a way that I believe that you and I can learn from. And so we are talking about feelings. Who's excited? Nobody. Nobody's excited. That's the deal. Because it's like nobody is like, oh, yes, I really want to sit around and talk about my feelings. Like I just love talking, not only just feelings, but I want to come around and I want to talk about the negative feelings that I'm having. I want to talk about the wounds and the trauma and the hurts that I have been experiencing in my life. Let's just sit around and we can just go around the room right now and you guys can all just share the negative feelings and the wounds and the hurts and the pains. Like we don't want to do that, right? But I do believe that there's something powerful when we learn what Jesus did, the way that he responded, and the way that he experienced things, because he shows us his human side that we can relate to in how he feels things, but he shows us his God side, his fully God side of his life in the way that he responds to those things. In the way that he responds to the feelings that he has, he shows us and reminds us that he is fully God and that his life is an example that you and I can follow. So this whole series, we're talking about feelings, hurts, traumas, wounds, but today, more specifically than just average, just general feelings, today we're going to talk about fear. We're going to talk about fear, everybody's favorite emotion. I don't know, do any of you guys, who likes scary movies in the house today? A couple of you crazy people like scary movies. I hate scary movies, okay? I do not like being scared because the problem is I watch the scary movie, and then when I take my garbage cans to the end of the driveway, I run like I'm being chased by Satan up the driveway. Like, that's the problem with it. It's like the scary movie's totally fine, but then I find myself running like my hair is on fire up the driveway in the dark, okay? And that's just not a life that I want to live. And so maybe you guys have something that you can do, that you watch the scary movie and it's just like, deleted, everything's good and wonderful again. But for me, it terrifies me for years and years and years and decades. And so I don't like being scared. I don't like watching scary movies. I don't like haunted houses. However, I like scaring people. I like hiding around the corner and scaring my family. I like scaring the staff when they walk in the building on a random day. I also like recording it on my phone for my own selfish pleasure later on to watch them get totally terrified. I love watching the scare videos on the internet. It's absolutely amazing. The more they get scared, I love the people who can't control their face when they get scared and they create this crazy move. But fear is real. We know it when we experience it. We know it when we see it. We know what it feels like to experience fear in ourselves. It's not something that we're foreign to, but I just don't like it, and I think that most of us don't like it. I think that maybe we do like it in the haunted house. We maybe like it in the movie, but in that moment, it's also because we can control it. We can put it in this nice, clean little box. And yet, when it goes outside of that box, when we find it impacting our security, when we find it impacting our everyday lives, when we find ourselves experiencing it on a real level in our lives, it's difficult. I don't like fear. And so a couple of years ago, a friend of mine suggested that I read this book called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. This is the book, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, and it's a really fun cover and a fun idea, and really it's more of a textbook, but the idea behind it, as we jump into the idea of fear and wounds and worry and anxiety today, is that when you look at this book, as we read through this book, it says, this is what zebras do in response to fear. And so what is the greatest fear? What is the greatest thing that zebras are afraid of? Lions. Everybody knows it's lions. I mean, they might get eaten by a tiger, they might get eaten by a hyena, but everybody knows king of the jungle, lion. Zebras are afraid of lions, and so it uses this illustration to say that when a lion comes into the area of zebras, zebras feel fear. They feel threatened. There is an imminent threat for them that a lion has come and they are going to be chased. And so what do zebras do when a lion comes in? They run. They run for their lives, quite literally. They run as fast and as far as they can from the lion. But then there's this moment where either the zebra gets away. We're going to use that illustration. Sometimes the lion wins. Okay, I'm sorry to bust the bubble. But when the zebra gets away, once the threat is gone, the lion is no longer chasing the zebra. Do you know what zebras do? They build fences and houses and put in security cameras, and they try to learn how to climb trees so they never have to deal with a lion again, right? Nope, that's what you do. And that's what I do. Nope, what zebras do is they go back to eating grass. The lion is gone, the threat is gone, the fear is gone, and in this moment, zebras go back to life. That's why zebras don't have ulcers. That's why zebras aren't struggling with anxiety. That's why zebras are not dealing with worry on a daily basis. But the problem is it's different for you and it's different for me because we're not zebras. We're human beings. We have been given the ability to remember and be reminded of the things and the fears and the situations that have threatened us in the past. And so when we look at our past, it impacts our future. And we find ourselves, again, if we're going to use the lion as an illustration, we think about the lion once chased us, and so now what I want to do is I want to create an environment where the lion no longer can penetrate into my world, where I no longer have to worry about the threat of lions. And so we build fences and build homes, and we find ourselves trying to create security around us. And obviously, we're no longer trying to escape from lions, but we're trying to escape from the things of this world that cause us fear. And so we put barricades and barriers between us and all the things that scare us. When something happens to us as human beings, we want to do everything we can to never feel that way again, right? I don't want to feel that fear again. I don't want to feel that struggle again. But our relationship with fear is complicated. Because on one hand, fear is good. Fear is something that keeps us alive. Fear is that feeling when there is an imminent threat around us. It's what keeps us from dying by really preventable things. It's that feeling that we get that prevents us from being hit by buses or falling off cliffs or doing things that will kill us. That is that feeling that God has given us. It's a good thing that we experience fear. Because if you didn't feel any fear, you'd die at a very young age. You would fall into things and you would experience things that would end your life way too young. Fear is simply an indicator. It's not a bad thing. It's an indicator that tells us that there is a threat. There's something threatening our safety. It's something that tells us we are not safe. It's an indicator for us to know that there's something happening around us that we are not safe. Whether or not that thing is real or that thing is simply perceived, our fear is something that is real. It tells us we are not safe. But fear can go beyond the way that God intended it to be used. It can go beyond this moment of just feeling something to keep us safe, to help us stay between the guardrails that He has put before us. Fear can turn into something way more than an indicator. It can turn into something that tells us we're never safe. It can turn into something that can make us afraid of everything, that everything is the lion, that nothing is safe around us. Fear can go far beyond the way that God has intended fear to be used, the emotion that He has given us to keep us safe. And it can move into a circle of not just fear, but a circle of anxiety, of a circle of worry. It can snowball into things that are more than just a singular fear that we have. But this word fear, this word anxiety, this word worry, they seem to get kind of lumped in all as the exact same thing, but they are three different individual things. And so I want to make sure that we separate those things out today. And so fear is something that we are afraid of. It's an imminent threat that is happening, an emotion that we're experiencing. But anxiety is the physical response that comes from fear. It's the physical response that comes from fear. And then worry is what we do after the threat is gone. It's when we think about the thing, the threat, over and over and over again. If we move back to the Serengeti, if we move back to the zebra world, what this would look like is worry would be that the lion no longer is chasing the zebra, but the zebra just continues to run in circles over and over and over again, continuing to look around. Is the lion here? 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 Like over and over and over again. And worry is where fear gets longevity. Worry is where fear grows legs and moves into a place that is no longer inside of the design that God has for it. Because wouldn't it be crazy if you literally came onto the Serengeti and zebras were just spinning in circles, searching for lions over and over and over again, looking all over the place? Where are they? Where are they? Where are they? It would be crazy to see that, and yet so oftentimes you and I are doing that in our everyday lives. We had a moment, we had an event that took place, and it scared us. And now at every place we look, every door we walk through, every situation we get into, every relationship we join into, we are looking into it and we are saying, is it going to be the same here? Is this person the same? Is this job the same? Is this scenario the same? Is this building the same? And we find ourselves afraid of everything. And the worry, it perpetuates. And we begin the cycle of having a moment which leads to a physical response, which leads to a cycle of worry. Worry gives power and longevity to fear. And so fear, it's an emotion that we all feel, we all experience when danger is approaching, when there's an imminent threat happening. And it's a mechanism, a defense mechanism that in its purest form, in its healthiest form, it keeps us alive. It keeps us alive. It keeps us from falling into traps, into things that are very, very preventable. But it can snowball from there. And I think so many of us have the tendency of not just looking at the threats that are imminent around us. What we begin to anticipate something that might be fearful. That's something that might be a fear. And we begin to run scenarios over and over and over again. Well, if this happened, then that could happen. And if that happened, then that could happen. And we find ourselves 20 steps in to a hypothetical situation. And if all of these things perfectly happen, then this might be a scary moment. And we find ourselves worrying about things that maybe will never absolutely happen. And we have millions of them. There are millions of hypothetical scenarios, hypothetical situations that might come true if all of these things happen. And then there's this moment where one of those millions of scenarios comes true, and we have a moment where we feel fear. And what do? We congratulate ourselves on our preparedness. I knew it was coming. I've been thinking about it. I've been thinking about it for 20 years, and now finally I lost my job. It happened. You've been worrying about it for 20 years for a singular moment, And we congratulate ourselves that we were prepared for this moment, and all of a sudden we say, you know what, this cycle of worry is worth it. This anxiety has now paid off for me. Me continuing to focus on my fear has worked, and it perpetuates the cycle. And now we create a new set of millions and millions of ideas and opportunities to be afraid. And so in its purest and healthiest form, it can keep us alive. But in its worst moment, it can destroy us. In its worst form, fear can and will destroy us, both spiritually and emotionally. And even if we allow it to go far enough, fear will kill us. It will destroy us physically. But the deciding factor on what fear will do for you and for me is found in how you and I respond to fear. It will be decided on how we respond to the fear that we experience. How do you respond after the threat is gone? Do you continue to look around every corner for another opportunity for that fear to come true? Or do you go back to eating grass? Do you go back to life? Do you understand that that moment happens and you want to process that and acknowledge it and deal with that, but you don't have to let it perpetuate and continue to move into every other corner of your life? What do you do when you experience fear? You see, last week we talked about this progression that takes place when it comes to our emotional world, when it comes to our lives, that there are things that happen to us, and those things are an event. There are thousands of events that take place in our life each and every day. And so this progression, there is an event, and that event, if it is a negative event, has the opportunity to go and turn into a worry. And if it turns into a worry, from there, if we don't deal with it there, it can turn into a belief. And from there, if we don't handle it there, then it will turn into an inner vow that we make with ourselves. And so there's this event that takes place, a scary moment, and it leaves a wound inside of us, and it hurts us, and we experience that. And from there, we can either begin to believe things that are not of God, that are not true, and if we don't deal with it there, then we will move into an inner vow, which is the fence of our world, that we are saying, I'm going to build this fence, I'm going to build this boundary, I'm going to build this barrier so that I never have to feel that wound again. But the amazing news, can you bring that back up for me? The amazing news about this progression is that at any moment between event and wound, between wound and belief, between belief and inner vow, at any moment you can change the trajectory of your fear by dealing with it, acknowledging it, and taking it before God. We are not on a one-way ticket to go all the way through that progression. We don't have to believe things that are not true, get all the way to inner vow before we deal with this moment. And the place that we see this, the thing that I believe is most profound about these moments where we feel fear and understand that we can move out of the event and out of the wound and out of the belief and out of the inner vow, is we find it inside of the life of Jesus. Again, that he was fully God and fully man, and in these moments where he has fearful scenarios, where he feels betrayed, where he feels abandoned, he could allow it to progress out of just the wound that happened and form a new belief about who he is, what the world is, and who God is. And then he can allow that to turn into an inner vow. But what Jesus does is he cuts it off at wound. Because you and I, we can't control the wound. We can't control the hurt that happened to us, but we can control what we do from there. And after the wound, we have the opportunity to move out of that wound and move into healing and away from a new belief and away from a new inner vow. Because that event, it could be so many different things. That scary moment for you could be totally different than me. The crazy thing is that two people can experience the exact same event, and one person experiences a wound and one person experiences nothing. And so for you, there are so many different events that it could be. The event that took place in your life, it could be that somebody got sick. Somebody close to you got sick, or somebody close to you that you love, they got cancer. Or one of your loved ones, your close friends or family members, they died. Maybe for you, the event was a miscarriage. Maybe the event is the inability to be able to have your own children. Maybe the event for you was your physical safety. Like someone assaulted you or abused you or touched you or hurt you in some way. Maybe you were in a situation where a stranger scared you or threatened you in a terrible way. Or maybe for you, the event was that you lost your reputation. And maybe that reputation was shattered because of something that you did, or maybe it was just simply lies that were being spread about you. But whatever the event was, the negative moment, there was a wound that was left behind in the wake of that event. And the hard part is that it's an event that we'd wish didn't happen. It was something we wished wouldn't have taken place, but here we are. It happened, and now we have a wound that we have to deal with. There's a wound that has been left, and now we have to deal with it. And if we're really honest, if you're anything like me, when that wound happens, when somebody else hurts me, when someone else scares me, when I feel threatened, my natural response is to bury it, to move on, to brush it under the rug, and to say, like, if I actually have to acknowledge it, that actually means that it's real. And I don't want to acknowledge that it was real. And if I can just brush it under the rug, I can act like it wasn't real and that it actually didn't happen. And then I just don't have to deal with it. I just want to forget about it and bury it. The last thing that I want to do is acknowledge it or share it. Like maybe if we just act like it didn't happen, then it'll just randomly, magically go away. The problem is that those problems, they don't go away. They don't magically heal themselves, right? Let's take it to a little bit of a different scenario for us. I had a good friend of mine growing up. His dad was a 6'5", big bohemian dude, and he owned the Ben Franklin in our town. And he was working in his store, and he was up on a 15-foot ladder, and he lost his balance, and he fell off the ladder, landed on the ground, and he broke his leg. And so, I mean, he's a guy, so what do guys do when they do stuff like that? They jump up, right? I'm good. He jumps up. He's like, I'm good. And then he's like, I'm just going to take a walk around the block quick. Starts walking around the block, hobbling around on a broken leg. He's just like, I'm just going to walk it off. It's not too bad. I'm just going to walk it off. Anybody else ever walked off a broken leg? I've never walked off a broken leg. You can't walk off a broken leg. The leg needs to be tended to. And it sounds like a really crazy scenario when you say that he fell off a ladder and he broke his leg. He had a wound that needed to be treated, and he said, I'm just going to go try and walk it off. And it's crazy when it comes to a broken leg, but when it comes to our emotions, when it comes to our fears, when it comes to our anxieties, when it comes to our worries, when it comes to the things that are strangling us in our lives, so many of us are just taking a walk around the block and hoping that we can walk it off. We're just hoping that a walk around the block will heal the fear and the wound and the trauma that we've experienced. So many of us are trying to walk off the wounds of our past. And it just simply isn't working. We have to deal with it. We have to acknowledge it. When we get hurt, when we have a wound after an event, we have one of two choices. We can try to just walk it off and hope it heals itself. Or we can acknowledge it and process it and deal with it. And I think as we sit in this place right here, right now, I think it's easy to say like, yep, I want to acknowledge it, I want to process it, I want to deal with it. It's easy inside of this room, and yet it's way easier said than done. It's so much easier to say, yes, I want to do it, than to actually live it out and walk it out. If we don't acknowledge and process and care for the wound, if we don't address it, if we don't clean the wound, if we don't examine it and deal with it, it will just simply get infected. It will get worse and worse and worse, and it will snowball into things we never wanted it to be. We will form a belief that we're never safe, that no one is safe, that nothing is safe, that God's not safe. Like from our fear, we form a belief about ourselves and beliefs about God, beliefs that aren't true. Like maybe if you were a kid and somebody who was close to you, they got sick and they died. Maybe now you live and you believe that you are always about to die, that you are always sick, that you feel like this thing in your mind or in your gut, or you feel this thing, you have this pain, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, I probably have cancer. I probably have a tumor. I probably have this, and you begin to snowball down. You've begun a belief inside of your mind that you are sick, that you are not well, and that you are going to die the same way that your loved one died when you were a kid. Or if you lost your reputation, you believe that everybody's still talking about that thing that you did. and you believe that you're probably going to screw up again and that you're going to lose your reputation again, and there's something else that you're going to do that's going to eventually cost you everything. And so you live inside of that belief that you are a mess up, not that you did mess up, but that you are a mess up, that you are a screw up, and that you will never change your ways, and that you are stuck in this cycle of fear of when is the hammer going to drop and you're going to do it again. You believe that the world is out to get you. Or if you were abused by a man earlier in your life, you maybe have formed the belief that all men are unsafe, that all men are dangerous, that you will never meet a man that cares for you, that you will never meet a man who can love you, and never meet someone who will fill your life, that all men are the same as the one that hurt you. Just in general, if we don't acknowledge our fear, it creates a belief. And it's a belief that we're not safe and that God's not safe and that we'll never be secure again. But the good news is, like I said before, that there is a moment, there is a way that we can change the trajectory of our lives, that after the event, after the wound, that we can move from there towards healings instead of moving towards belief and inner vows that causes us to be in a cycle of fear and anxiety. We see it so clearly in the life of Jesus. There are so many examples. As I was preparing this message, as I was looking up fear and what it looks like in light of the gospel, there are moment after moment after moment, story after story, both Old Testament and New Testament, where fear is a real thing, and we find God's response to fear. And so we're going to look inside of the book of Luke. And we are told that Jesus, in this moment, he is headed towards the cross. So he is headed towards a criminal's death. He is headed towards what his entire life has been going and moving towards. And so he knows this is going to happen. He knows that he is about to be brutally killed on the cross. And like any human being, again, fully God, so he knows it's happening, but he is fully human, and he doesn't want to do it. He does not want to be brutally killed on the cross. And so in this moment, he is fearful. He is experiencing anxiety and fear. And what did he do when he felt that fear? In verse 39 in Luke, it says this: Jesus went out as usual to the Mount of Olives. What I love as it opens up in this space, as was usual. When Jesus felt fear, the usual thing for him was to go away to the Mount of Olives, a place that was secluded, to retreat away and have his disciples go with him, have his community, have his friends go with him, and know what he was feeling, know what he was experiencing. And go to this place. Verse 40, on reaching the place, he said to his disciples, pray that you will not fall into temptation. He then withdrew even further, about a stone's throw beyond them, knelt down and prayed. 42, he says this: Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done. An angel from heaven appeared to him and strengthened him. And being in anguish, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was like drops of blood falling on the ground. So like Jesus, he's talking to his Father in heaven in this moment, and he's falling to his knees, and he's like, God, I am afraid. Like, I know that where I am going is I'm going to the cross. I know that I'm going to be brutally killed on this cross, and I know that that's going to happen, but I don't really want to do it. And if there is any way, his humanity is saying, if there is any way that I don't have to do this, let me do that. Release this cup from me. Release the cross from me. I don't want to feel this fear anymore. And then he triggers and moves over into fully God, and he says, yet not my will be done, but yours be done, God. He's like, I am afraid and I don't want to do this, but I trust you enough to say that if this is what needs to be done, then I am willing to go to that place. If it is not my fear being released, but I need to go and do this thing, then I trust you. And I just know for myself, I struggle to get to that place. I find myself in this moment, God, I'm afraid and I am uncertain and I am insecure in this place. And so I would like you to miraculously remove that from me. Period. End of story. There is no yet not my will, but yours be done. And yet when we look at Jesus, when we look at his example, when he felt fear, what did he do? He moved away and he brought his fears and his anxieties and his worries before God. He acknowledged them and he speaks them out loud and he says, this is what I'm feeling. This is what I want. But God, I trust you. God, I'm afraid. And I don't want this to happen. But please, if there's any way to remove the cross from me, please do it. Like, he is so fearful. He is so anxious. It says that his sweat turned into blood. As he is kneeling in the garden, face down, pleading with God to release him from the burden of the cross, he is so fearful that his blood turns to sweat, his sweat turns to blood dropping on the ground. And we just remember in this moment that Jesus is fully God and also fully man, and he is showing us his humanity. He is showing us that he experienced fear. He experienced betrayal. He experienced those wounds. And then he flips over and he says, I am also fully God, and I trust you. Because you notice what Jesus didn't do. In the face of fear, he didn't just brush it off. He didn't act tough. He didn't try to act like it wasn't real, like it wasn't happening. He didn't try to act like it didn't exist. He didn't try to walk it off. Friends, Jesus didn't try to walk off his fear. He dealt with it, and he acknowledged it. Instead of trying to walk it off, he is fully honest with God. He says, I'm hurting. He says, I'm afraid. And he pleads, and he says, please take this away from me. God, I don't want this to happen. You see, Jesus in this moment, he acknowledges the fear he is facing. Jesus acknowledges the fear that he's facing. And so you and I have to do the exact same thing. We have to acknowledge the fear that we're facing. Inside of the 12-step world, the very first thing that we have to do is acknowledge the thing that we are facing, to realize that we are powerless to our past. That the past is the past, and we can't change the past, but we can certainly impact our future. We need to do this. We need to acknowledge it. And not just acknowledge it in the quietness of our own hearts. We don't just need to write it down on a card somewhere. We need to acknowledge it in the presence of God. We need to acknowledge it before God and bring it to him and pray to him, acknowledge our fears and take action. There's power in prayer. And I don't want you to hear me saying that if you're feeling anxiety, if you're feeling fear, just like pray it away. Like poof, silver bullet. Like, I was fearful yesterday, but I prayed that God would take it away, and then poof, never was afraid ever again. It's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that there's power in prayer. There's power in laying down our fears at the feet of Jesus and trusting and believing that he can redeem them, that he can reconcile them, that he can remove them. And the great thing is that he can be the silver bullet, that it can be, poof, your fear is gone. That is not all of our stories. That's not always the way that things go. But Jesus is powerful enough. God is powerful enough to be able to do those things if we will bring them to him in prayer. Throughout Scripture, we hear over and over again, when angels appear to people, they say, fear not. When people are dealing with adversity in their circumstances, they find themselves being fearful. And God over and over again says, fear not, for I am your God. Bring yourself to me in prayer. It is all over the Old Testament and New Testament. And one of my favorite verses about anxiety and fear, it comes in Paul's letter to the Philippians. And he says it in chapter 4, verse 6, one of my favorite verses. It says, do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. In everything, with thanksgiving, present your prayers and your petitions. Petitions isn't really a word that we use anymore, but it's simply bringing your requests, bringing your hopes. And in that moment, one of the cool things is that our hopes and our prayers is that God would be glorified. And so we bring our praises. And so instead of petitions, let's replace that word with praise. And so in every situation, by prayer and praise with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. Do not be anxious. Do not be fearful about anything. But in all situations, by prayer and praise, present your requests to God. In every situation, with thanksgiving. Through prayer and praise, we bring those things before God. In Isaiah 41, it says, do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. Jesus is saying, I am your God. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. Fear is not your God. This world is not your God. Anxiety is not your God. Trauma is not your God. Worry is not your God. Wounds are not your God. I am your God. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. And there is security in that moment. There is security in that space. Don't fear, I am here, is what God is saying to you tonight. God is saying to you that inside of your darkest moments, have no fear because I am here and I am the God of the universe and I have power over all darkness and all fear. And inside of my perfect love, it drives out fear. It doesn't just kind of like take the edges off. It drives it completely out. It is inside of the love of God that we can find ourselves, inside of the fullness of who God is through our prayers and through our praise. We can eradicate that fear. It is the ultimate dagger to our fear. In Psalm 34, David is experiencing fear and anxiety. And what David is saying in this moment, in Psalm 34, he is saying the ultimate killer of fear is worship. The ultimate dagger in the back of your fear is worship. It's prayer, and it's praise, and it's petition, and it's bringing your beliefs and your fears and your inner vows before God and saying, I don't want these anymore. I want what you have for me, not what this world has for me, and I want to bring it all to you in prayer and praise and say, God, you can have all of this, and I want to find myself covered in praise because you are my God, fear is not. The greatest killer of fear is worship. In Isaiah 41, it said, fear not, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed that I am your God. And then 20 chapters later, in chapter 61 of Isaiah, Isaiah writes, to combat your fear and your anxiety, put on a garment of praise. Jesus shows us in the garden to pray, to bring our requests before God. In Psalms, it says to bring ourselves before God in worship. In Isaiah 61, it says to put on the garment of praise. And so, church, friends, I want to say to you today, if you want to put on the garment of praise, we have to take off the garment of fear. We have to take off the garment of anxiety. We have to take off the garment of worry. We have to take off the garment of this world so that we can cover ourselves with the garment of praise, with the garment of praise, with the garment of praise. Each and every day, each and every moment in the events of our lives, when we feel the fears of this world, we have an opportunity to follow after Jesus' example and to fall to our knees and to pray to God and to say, I give you this and I'm afraid and I don't want this. And then as we stand up, to put on a garment of praise and say, I will walk in the truth and the promise of who you are, not in the truth of this fear, not in the worries that I have, not in the anxieties of these things, but I will walk in the truth and the promise of this garment of praise of who you are and who you have called me to be. And in that moment, anxiety falls away because our focus has moved from what we are carrying and what we are worried about and what we are anxious about, and our eyes are no longer fixed on that, and our eyes are fixed on the cross of Christ and on who he is, because we can't be fixed on two things. You can't worship two masters. You cannot be fully focused on who Jesus is in praise and prayer and also be focused on the worries and the anxieties of our lives. And so the greatest enemy of our lives is to focus on that fear, and the greatest power against that fear is prayer and praise. And so I want to call us up, and I want to say, church, let's put on a garment of praise. Let's bring our fears before a holy and loving God, and let's say to him that these are the things I'm anxious about. And let's follow after the example of Jesus and find ourselves in the moments of fear to no longer allow them to snowball, but to say, God, you are God and I am not, and you can have these fears. Jesus, I'm afraid, but your grace is enough. But you are enough. You are strong enough. You are God and fear is not. And each and every morning that we stand up and we say, God, I'm going to put on a garment of praise. And I'm going to praise you for who you are first and foremost. And I'm going to allow the praise of my heart and the praise of my mind and the praise of my life be the greatest defense against the fears of this world. To push back the darkness of this world. And so as we wrap up our time together, I want to invite the band to come up. We're going to spend some time in extended praise. And I want to give us an opportunity to spend time putting on the garment of praise, to stand up and to praise God for who he is, and to be reminded that in the midst of all of the fears and the things that we've experienced, that praise can continue to move out from where we are, and it can cover the fears and cover the anxieties that we have. And so I'm going to pray here in just a couple moments, and as I pray, what I want to invite you to do is before we praise, before we lift up the name of Jesus, before we talk about the qualities that he is, what I want us to do is I want us to come before God, and I want us to lay the fears and the things that we're struggling with at his feet. And I'm going to invite you, wherever you're at. This might be a little bit awkward or uncomfortable for you, but you might need to actually get on your knees and pray. You might need to step out of the comfort zone of the seat that you're sitting in. You might need to step out into the aisle and kneel down and lay yourself barren before God and say, God, this is my fear and I don't want it anymore. And so whatever that looks like for you, church, I want there to be an amount of healing in this place, that we would lay down fears that we haven't laid down before. And then we would lay them down before Jesus and believe that through prayer and praise that we can find healing for the things that we've experienced in our lives. And so as I pray, I want to invite you to just lay those things down and to call them out, whether it's in the quietness of your own heart. I promise you, you will not disrupt this room. If you need to pray them out loud, pray them out loud. Declare the fears that you are experiencing and to say, Jesus, I am afraid of blank. But as I pray, church, let's not leave without declaring out the things that are laying in our hearts and to say, God, I don't want these fears anymore. And let's lay them before Jesus. And so, God, we give them to you in this moment. And Jesus, we say to you, by the power of the Holy Spirit, that you can come and that you can heal us. And so, God, we just come before you and say, Jesus, I'm afraid of, God, I'm afraid of failure. I'm afraid of failing my family. I'm afraid of failing at work. I'm afraid of not being successful enough. I'm afraid that I don't have an image that's good enough. I'm afraid that I won't have enough money. I'm afraid of that thing that I did back in my past that nobody knows about. And God, I come before you in this moment and I ask you, and I thank you that you are a God who takes it. But Jesus, I'm afraid of, just fill in the blank. And God, we come before you on our knees. Maybe that's just the knees of our soul, but God, we come before you and we say to you that you are the ultimate healer, that you are the great physician, that you are the wonderful counselor, and that in you that we can find healing, God. So God, as we lay these things down, I pray that you give us courage to not pick them back up. And God, that each and every moment and each and every day that we would wake up and that we would put on the garment of praise and that we would put a dagger in the fear of that we are carrying around, God, and that we would cover up that fear with praise and that we would be known by the praise that we experience and that we would praise you more fully. So God, release us of this fear and fill us to overflowing with your goodness and your love and your peace. And God, help us to change the cycle that we are on, that we would deal with the wounds of our fears through prayers and petition and praise, God. God, hear our praise. Allow our voices and our praise. Allow our prayers to be declared in heaven, and that as you hear them, that the throne room would erupt with praise. That your presence would be felt in this place, that your spirit would fill every crack of this place, every corner of this room, every crack and corner of our life. And God, that we would cover it in the praise of who you are. God, we love you and we praise you and we give you these things and we cover them in this moment with praise.